I just want to say I think the title snailed it. Our first speaker is Jaret Daniels from the Florida Museum of Natural History, University of Florida. Go Gators. His presentation is titled Advancing Our Understanding of At-Risk Butterfly Conservation Efforts. Jaret Daniels is the Associate Director and Head of Exhibits and Public Programs for the Florida Museum of Natural History. He's also the curator of the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera and Biodiversity and a professor in the Department of Entomology and Nematology at the University of Florida. An entomologist by training, he specializes in the ecology and conservation of at-risk butterflies and other native insect pollinators. His lab works across many different landscapes in an effort to develop best insect conservation and management practices, from wildlands and farmscapes to roadsides and suburban yards. He is also a professional nature photographer and the author of many successful field guides, gardening books, and general interest titles on butterflies, insects, wildflowers, native plants, and wildlife landscaping. The animals he is most excited to see here in Arizona are Paige Howarth and Adrian Brewster. Please welcome Jaret.
And trust me, you don't miss the humidity. It's a horrible year in Florida. Well, it's really great to kick off the conservation session today. I'm really excited. Always excited to be here and see friends and colleagues. And I'm going to give a little bit of a different presentation today. It's a little more kind of data-driven. But I first want to acknowledge my collaborator, Nusha Kegabati from Western University in Canada. She was my Canadian participant for part of this survey effort. So as you all know from Scott Black's presentation on Wednesday night, you know, the insect and butterfly community are not doing very well. And in North America, there's lots of evidence of decline across common species and increasingly at-risk species, dwindling, populations becoming fewer and fewer, and abundance levels going downward on a pretty significant trend. But what I'm most interested in are sort of these guys. So on this picture are sort of a combination of declining taxa that are candidates for federal listing under the ESA, and then an assortment of some of the 32 federally listed species as threatened or endangered under the ESA. Particularly because my lab does ex situ conservation as kind of one of our kind of primary objectives. And of the 32 taxa that are listed under the ESA, about 21 have approved recovery plans, recovery outlines, or draft recovery plans or outlines. And about 90% of those recommend some ex situ activity, translocation, head starting, captive breeding, organism reintroduction as part of the overall recovery strategy to get them off the ESA and on the road back to recovery. But the challenge is, as we all know, that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot of organisms in the next 10 years and beyond that are going to be candidates for federal listing that deserve listing, but currently are not even petitioned for listing. So the opportunity is for this community, the informal science education community of museums, zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, and natural history, nature centers, to play a larger role in the recovery, the planning, and the ex situ breeding and recovery of these individual taxa. So we were very interested in sort of getting some baseline data to see sort of what that landscape looks like currently. So similar to a survey I did about 13 years ago when I received funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services for an initiative called Imperiled Butterfly Conservation and Management, where we took individuals around, 35 participants around to 6 different venues across North America to see butterfly conservation and management actions in the field, in the lab. It was really a fantastic experience, but we really predicated that initiative getting good baseline data on what the practitioners wanted and what the agency personnel wanted. So Nusha and I collaborated on this survey. We sent it out to a wide range of agency biologists across Canada, across the US, and also a wide range of very select practitioners that are actively dealing with at-risk butterfly conservation. We had hoped for about 50 respondents. We got 47, so it's pretty good. This is a pretty niche area, and it's really hard to get agency biologists to participate. In fact, there's a whole new approval process with the federal government to actually even get them to take an online survey for anything research related. The approval process actually takes a lot longer than the actual survey and probably costs a lot more money for the approval process than a 5-minute survey would take, but that is the approval process. And the overall kind of participant spectrum was about 50-50 of practitioners and agency biologists. And I want to walk you through just kind of the high-level questions that we asked, because I think it will inform sort of directions, gaps, opportunities, and needs within the ex situ butterfly conservation world. So one of the first questions we wanted to know is that if you're involved in butterfly conservation, what specifically are you doing? And so here you can see, and apologize for maybe the small font size, agencies are in blue, practitioners are in orange, the UF Gator colors. But what you can see here is that people are doing a lot, everything from extant population monitoring, captive breeding, organism reintroduction, recovery planning, and the list goes on and on. And we also left room for individual entry, and the kind of the other category, one of the biggest areas that obviously practitioners are working on is public outreach and education. So this gave us a good snapshot of sort of the spectrum of activities that we all are undertaking on a daily basis. We also really wanted to get a better understanding of what expertise was on staff. So we asked the question, do you have an invertebrate biologist, an entomologist, or somebody with entomological training on your staff? Because this has always been a pinch point. And as you know, many of the agency biologists that are writing listing decisions, that are writing recovery plans, many of those have very limited entomological experience. And so that's a real challenge. So luckily, a good portion had some level of entomological or invertebrate-based experience. And for those that didn't, there's a big need, right? There's clearly an identified need by agencies and practitioners that we wish we had somebody on staff that could have a little bit more depth of expertise. So this is a great opportunity to look for training and really staffing in the future. And then we also asked, in lieu of a position like that, would your agency, your organization benefit from sort of opportunities for resources, best practice resources, or training? And I think, this really tells it all. Yes, there's a lot of need, a lot of interest in additional best practice documents, additional training, and this is a great opportunity space for all of us, the experts in the room, to provide this sort of support, kind of venue of resources to agencies and other organizations, because we know that they definitely need it and would benefit from something like that. We also really wanted to know what were the pinch points for them. What was limiting their participation? Was it simply funding? Was it staffing? Was it time? Was it expertise? And again, what you can see here is that it's kind of all of the above. It's very specific to the individual, the organization, the agency. And one thing we also noticed from agency participants is that they often were limited by the coordination of programming, by organizing working groups, by vetting proposals, by kind of bringing larger groups together for recovery planning. That was their pinch point. So again, we have another opportunity to help move that along and alleviate sort of the dam that's being created by some of these limitations. We also wanted to know a little bit about the resources that individual institutions were developing. So we asked, if you are involved in ex situ conservation, do you have a management plan, a protocol, a husbandry protocol, or do you have a genetic management plan in place? And is that document shareable with sister organizations, shareable with government agencies? And so you can kind of see, a little bit here that yes, a number of them do have, well-vetted husbandry manuals or protocols. Very few, unfortunately, had genetic management plans, even though this has been a priority for Fish and Wildlife and other agencies to develop more kind of genetic resources and sort of, pop gen related research. So this needs to translate more into the actual laboratory ex situ work on a daily basis. And even more surprising to me, I guess, is if they did have a document, was it openly shareable with other agencies or organizations? And so certainly some said yes, but a lot said maybe, that they didn't know, could they share that document with others? And so that's another hurdle in sort of the communication, the collaborative opportunity space that we have available with this sort of niche area. And then we also wanted to know what type of data collection were they embarking on if they had an ex situ program, and what did they do with those data once they collected them? And so here you can see that, yes, there's a lot of different uses for the data, everything from it is shared with agencies and collaborators, it's incorporated into project reports, it's analyzed for peer review publication, but a lot just sort of kept them in a file cabinet, they kept them on a server, they just had a backlog of data that they couldn't get out, they couldn't analyze, they couldn't share with partners for ultimately landing into a peer review publication, which again is a huge pinch point because that document, that knowledge base just isn't getting out there. And a lot of these organizations have long-standing data that encompasses many, many years, but if it's not getting out and getting analyzed, it's really a black box. So this again is an opportunity to help organizations and work with agencies and researchers and universities to get this information analyzed and out for publication. We also asked a little bit more about what additional collaborations would be useful in the work that you do on a daily basis to help advance butterfly conservation and recovery efforts. And again, this is pretty broad. There's a lot of opportunity. Obviously, we're a very collaborative community. And certainly, we all collaborate with at least some agency, local, provincial, federal, a lot of local governments, a lot of other conservation NGOs. But a couple things that came out of this that agencies and practitioners really wanted is they wanted more private landowner collaboration. They wanted more collaboration with native plant growers. These were gaps that weren't identified in earlier surveys. So they're starting to think more broadly about how do we get the resources we need? How do we get information out and work with land managers on restoration projects, on work in the lab and kind of connecting those dots more effectively. So broadly, the big takeaways from this is, again, there's a lot of opportunity for this community to really advance butterfly conservation, work with agencies, work with other organizations. It was clear from the survey that having experience on staff was a key need. It wasn't realized in a great majority of programs. So we have an opportunity to work with agencies, to work with all of you to get that expertise out there, to work with universities, work with maybe the Directorate Fellowship Program at U.S. Fish and Wildlife to ensure that the people that are ultimately going to be in position to make listing decisions, to write recovery plans, have the correct knowledge to be useful and as comprehensive as possible to serve the organisms that they're ultimately trying to conserve. Having access to training resources and active in-person or virtual training was a universal desire, that is clearly important, particularly best management practices for restoration and also for ex situ work at organizations. So again, this is another opportunity where we can work collaboratively as a community to provide those resources. And I heard a lot from individual agencies that simply having a document that would list expertise in different areas. And we had a question about an ex situ protocol or a monitoring method. We don't know who to go to. We needed experts listed and a resource base that we could easily tap without having to scratch our heads and say, who do we actually go to vet this information? There was surprisingly no clear factor that was sort of limiting butterfly recovery efforts. And so this is both good and bad. There's a lot of pinch points out there. So there's a lot of opportunities to alleviate some of those pinch points, but it spans, a pretty broad spectrum. And then obviously BMPs, like I mentioned before, BMPs were hands down from organizations and particularly from agencies, the resource that they wanted most. What have you learned in the process? How can you share that with us so that we can make more informed decisions to advance conservation and recovery of these taxa, either at risk or listed? And then clearly there was a lot of opportunity to look at data that the ex situ community collected, ensuring that that was synthesized, it was analyzed, and it actually got out to the peer review literature so that we could learn more from that information. So again, my big take-home point on all of this is that we have a lot of opportunity to come together to work more collaboratively across institutions and agencies to really advance butterfly conservation efforts and really insect conservation efforts more broadly, because there is a lot of will out there, but resources, training, and expertise are really, really needed. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you for enduring these graphs, but I just think that this type of data is really useful. It's useful for applying for grants. It's useful for having communications with organizations and particularly with agencies and how we can collaboratively advance insect conservation efforts. Thank you so much.
This was a great talk, and you may have looked out and seen me nodding my head a lot. So a conundrum that I have, and it's not a butterfly related one, but it's related to what was on the slides, is how do we connect with the university partners to let them know we have a data set that's 2 decades old, and we have the voucher specimens that it goes back, and all of these things. How do we communicate with them? Because we're not the experts. We've reached out to our local partners, our local universities, and there's been no interest there. But we have good data sets, and I don't know where to go with them, I guess. So I don't know if you have an answer or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so we're one of the unique entities, or we're a university. We do a lot of the ex situ work, which is very non-traditional. But I would say I work a lot with graduate students, and so particularly master's students. The data sets that you have are really, they're gold, right? There are a lot of opportunity to do a pretty time-limited project where they don't have to collect the data, but they can analyze the data. So I would just reach out and say, we have these resources. This would be probably a really great student project. And if you can convince them that this will really lead to publication. I mean, again, we have that, publish or perish mandate, right? We have to get information out there. So I think just reaching out and even reaching out to, the departmental student listserv or that. I mean, I think a lot of students will be interested in the data you have. We even have now programs at University of Florida. I'm sure a lot of other universities have sort of capstone projects for even undergraduates that, having the data, there, it's a already made project. So you just got to sell it, I think, that way, because it's fantastic. And some of those data sets go back, years and years and years, where, that's just unheard of for many listed taxa or at-risk taxa.
Probably got time for one more. Anybody online have a question? Our virtual friends? Not yet? Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you, guys.